In the bustling metropolis of Corsair, where modernity collided with remnants of a bygone era, Veronica Stark was known as a force to be reckoned with, a daring raconteur whose voice could shake the staid columns of power. On a sweltering summer afternoon, as the city simmered under the relentless sun, a piece of outrageous news spread through the concrete canyons and narrow alleyways alike. Whispers and murmurs carried a tale so extraordinary that it seemed plucked directly from a fable. A revered judge had purportedly levied a $50,000 fine against Veronica, accusing her of disrupting the natural order of speech and threatening to silence her potent expression. The setting for this peculiarity was none other than the historic courthouse of Corsair, a building that wore its illustrious past like a heavy cloak of tradition. Its venerable halls, lined with portraits of austere magistrates and adorned with majestic, time-worn chandeliers, suddenly buzzed with an energy that was both electric and rebellious. Today, these halls were to play host not to the typical mundane legal proceedings, but to a spectacle that would challenge the very essence of what a courtroom could represent. Veronica strode into the chamber with a confidence that defied the stifling formality of the environment. Dressed in an ensemble that accentuated her bold personality, a sharply tailored jacket paired with vibrant accessories that seemed to shimmer with rebellious intent, she exuded a defiant energy. It was as if every step she took resonated with the heartbeat of a crowd long relegated to silence. The room, a paradoxical blend of archaic customs and modern critiques, fell silent as the judge, the infamous Alderic Merriweather, banged his gavel with a pompous air. His voice, coarse and laden with authority, filled the space as he announced the unprecedented fine. According to his decree, Veronica's habit of inciting uninhibited expression was a clear violation of the unspoken laws that maintained the equilibrium between decorum and dissent. As his words echoed off the cold stone walls, the audience, an eclectic mix of high-ranking officials, local dignitaries, and curious citizens, watched in a state of incredulous fascination. Many exchanged glances, as though silently wondering whether they were witnessing a miscarriage of justice or the birth of a new age of civil rebellion. For Veronica, however, the accusation was not a moment of despair, but an invitation to stage, a magnificent performance of her dissent. In that charged atmosphere, every gaze fixed on her, she smiled, a subtle curve of the lips that belied the storm of intellect and creativity surging beneath. With that smile, it was clear that the fine was not a threat, but a challenge to elevate her voice even more. For hours, the courtroom was transformed into a theater where the rigid rules of law and the fluid cadence of spoken art collided. Veronica recounted stories of battles fought not with arms, but with words, a chronicle of individuals who had dared to defy oppressive forces with the power of well-crafted discourse. In her narrative, even the most absurd bureaucratic edicts became mere plot devices in an epic tale of resistance. Each sentence was meticulously crafted, drawing from a deep reservoir of historical irony and modern wit, evoking images of ancient orators standing against tyrants whose only armament was the misuse of authority. The air pulsed with a rhythm of wit and indignation that resonated far beyond the confines of the courtroom's high arches. The judge's face, usually an expressionless mask of stoic authority, betrayed hints of discomfort as Veronica continued her verbal onslaught. Every reference to outdated legal edicts and every jab at an erstwhile revered precedent served only to highlight the absurdity inherent in his own decree. His attempts to reassert control by citing the very laws he believed to be non-negotiable only underscored the disconnect between the letter of the law and the spirit of the people it was meant to serve. Even as traditional legal scholars tried to interject with cautionary words, the weight of Veronica's rhetoric became impossible to ignore. With a blend of dramatic pauses and incisive humor, she turned a moment of legal solemnity into a vibrant dialogue about freedom in its most elemental form. Outside the confines of the courthouse, the city erupted into a spontaneous celebration of free speech. Social media platforms lit up with videos and images, each capturing the moment when Veronica's defiant smile challenged the pretensions of a decrepit system. Cafes, street corners, and even offices became hubs of animated discussions, as citizens debated whether this was indeed an act of judicial overreach or merely the inevitable confrontation between counterculture and established order. News outlets reported live from the scene with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration, embellishing every detail of the encounter to fit the narrative of a modern David and Goliath, where the only weapon was a fearless voice. In backrooms and underground gatherings, intellectuals and creative souls began to draft manifestos inspired by Veronica's stand. They saw in her words not mere defiance, but an invocation of a new societal paradigm, one where the audacity to speak truth to power was celebrated rather than repressed. Community bulletin boards outside the courthouse soon displayed impromptu posters and hand-drawn caricatures of the judge and his archaic decrees. The fine, initially intended as a punitive measure, evolved into a symbol, a talisman that encapsulated the clash between oppressive authority and the boundless potential of creative expression. Veronica herself became a beacon of hope for those who had long felt confined by the rigid expectations of a bureaucracy that seemed frozen in time. As the day turned into twilight and the grandeur of the courthouse faded into the cooling shadows of dusk, her resolve remained unshaken. With every retelling of the event, a new layer of meaning was added. It was not merely about standing up against fines or outdated laws, but about reclaiming the right to dream, speak, and act without restraint. The courtroom had become her canvas, and every word was a stroke of brilliance painting the portrait of a society reborn from the ashes of its outdated dogmas. In the weeks that followed, the incident at the courthouse was dissected, debated, and even celebrated in academic circles and casual conversations alike. Scholars wrote essays analyzing the interplay between legal tradition and modern protest, while poets penned verses extolling the beauty of a spirit untamed by conventional boundaries. Within this maelstrom of ideas and emotions, Veronica Stark's unexpected legal battle emerged as a touchstone, a narrative so absurd, so deliciously radical, that it invited everyone to reimagine the very nature of authority and resistance. Thus, in a single defiant afternoon, an entire movement was ignited. Veronica Stark had taken what was intended as a crippling penalty and transformed it into a rallying cry for modern freedom. The fine, once a menacing figure looming over her every word, had been deftly flipped into a symbol of empowerment. Her story in the courtroom was more than a legal battle. It was a declaration that the power of the human spirit, when armed with wit and unyielding courage, could overturn even the most entrenched systems of control. As the echoes of that historic day continued to reverberate through the halls of Corsair, one thing was abundantly clear. The nation was on the cusp of a radical transformation, one that would redefine the meaning of dissent and the role of authority. And it all began with a single, resounding act of defiance, a testament to the enduring truth that sometimes the mightiest weapon is not a sword or a law, but the eternal, irrepressible power of the spoken word. A week after the notorious fine was announced, the air in Corsair was buzzing with anticipation and audacity. The courthouse, once a structure embodying solemn justice and austere decorum, was now being reimagined as an arena of defiance and flamboyant expression. On the day of the secondary hearing, the building had undergone an arresting transformation. It was no longer merely a place where legal battles were fought in measured tones. Instead, it had become the stage for a spectacle that blurred the boundaries between law, art, and theatrical performance. The transformation was immediately apparent upon arrival. High above the grand entrance, bright banners fashioned from recycled canvases proclaimed messages of freedom and wit, while colorful murals that reinterpreted ancient legal symbols winked at passers-by. Along the corridors that led to the main courtroom, citizens and activists had erected impromptu installations, collages made from newspaper clippings, ironic drawings, and snippets of overheard legal jargon, each piece exuding a palpable sense of rebellion. The crowd gathered outside the building was an eclectic mix, from seasoned legal experts curious about this modern twist to artists and free spirits eager to witness history being rewritten with irony and flair. Inside the remodeled courtroom, the very air vibrated with charged expectancy. Gone were the usual sterile, intimidating lines of courtroom protocol. In their place, a uniquely vibrant setup took shape, drawing inspiration from both high theater and street performance. The judge's bench, typically a monolithic symbol of rigid authority, had been reimagined as an ornate dais, with subtle hints of playful design, a stark contrast to the usual sober surroundings. Along the back wall, a large digital screen streamed live social media feeds from citizens far and wide, each posting their own commentary with hashtags that declared solidarity with free speech and artistic dissent. Standing at the center of this transformed space was none other than Veronica Stark herself, now elevated to the role not only of defendant, but also of an outspoken maestro of the absurd. Dressed in a vibrant, unconventional ensemble that mixed classical elements with modern punk-inspired accessories, Veronica exuded confidence and a hint of mischief. Her presence was magnetic, drawing every eye in the room. Alongside her, a cadre of supporters, artists, musicians, poets, and everyday citizens formed a protective circle, each exuding an air of celebration rather than apprehension. At the outset of the proceedings, the judge Aldrich Merriweather entered the courtroom. His demeanor, once synonymous with unyielding rigidity, now seemed tinged with a blend of theatrical formality and slight bemusement. Today, his role had morphed from that of an inflexible arbiter to a reluctant ringmaster. With a measured, almost ceremonial pace, he ascended the dais and took his seat. Each of his movements, amplified by the ambient music softly echoing in the background, was scrutinized by an audience that hung on every gesture and word. The session began traditionally enough. The judge cleared his throat and delivered an opening statement that was a classic recitation of legal principles and antiquated regulations. Yet, the words seemed to float in the charged air without the typical gravitas one might expect. As he spoke, the digital screen behind him flashed images of street performances, protest art, and scenes of everyday people making creative expressions, images that resonated deeply with the collective mood of challenge against conformity. Veronica wasted no time in seizing the moment. As soon as the judge concluded his formal remarks, she stepped forward into the center of the courtroom with a confident air, her eyes sparkling with irony. With a voice that oscillated between gentle persuasion and commanding declaration, she began to recount her tale not as a mere retelling of events but as a performance piece, a narrative that blended personal experience with a broader commentary on the absurdity of a system that sought to clamp down on genuine human expression. Her story unfolded like a dramatic monologue, laced with cleverly timed humorous asides and poignant observations. She spoke of the fine not as a punitive measure, but as an emblem of an outdated mindset, an effort by the establishment to silence voices that dared to challenge the status quo. Each word was imbued with layered meanings, and each pause allowed the courtroom and the watching public to absorb and reflect on the deeper societal issues at play. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the atmosphere grew even more electric. A renegade orchestra, its musicians hidden among the crowd, softly played unconventional tunes that intermingled classical strings with modern electronic rhythms. The harmonies seemed to echo the disparate yet harmonious blend of tradition and rebellion occurring in the room. As Veronica's voice resonated through the space, the judge's attempt to counter her narrative with bureaucratic jargon appeared increasingly futile. The legal proclamations that usually enforced order and silence began to lose their authoritative edge in the face of her fervor and creativity. The turning point in the session came when Veronica introduced the concept of the courtroom circus. With a dramatic flourish, she described how the rigid structures of bureaucracy had been reduced to nothing more than performative rituals, a circus where the rules were secretly meant to be upended rather than enforced. She jested about how the gavel, meant to symbolize finality, now served more as a prop in a theatrical production, its rhythm underscoring the ludicrous nature of an authoritarian spectacle masquerading as justice. Her words brought the room to life. Laughter and applause erupted from unexpected quarters, lawyers who, for a moment, seemed to shed their formality, court staff who exchanged knowing smiles, and an audience that had come to witness a historical subversion. Even the judge's stern expression softened imperceptibly as he found himself caught between maintaining control and succumbing to the contagious energy of the moment. The digital screen behind them continued to flood with real-time reactions, each message a testament to the widespread resonance of Veronica's defiant performance. As the dialogue between traditional authority and the unbridled force of creative dissent reached a fever pitch, the courtroom became less a battleground of legal arguments and more a stage for a cultural revolution. Veronica aptly declared that the court was no longer the sole dominion of archaic law, but a dynamic arena for the free flow of ideas, where art, satire, and narrative fused into a potent challenge to suppressive norms. Throughout the day, The interplay of voices, both those bound by legal formality and those breaking free from its constraints, demonstrated the transformative power of public discourse. Every pointed remark and every humorous quip chipped away at the formidable wall of convention. Beneath the surface of playful theatrics lay a profound message that justice, when stripped of its pomp, could be an instrument not just for repression, but for renewal. The ancient words of law had been repurposed into lively, rhythmic declarations of freedom, blurring the line between adjudication and artistic expression. As the proceedings drew inexorably to a close, the once formidable judge found himself, if only momentarily, impotent in the face of a tide of creativity that defied any strict legal interpretation. In his final remarks of the day, his voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with reluctant admiration for the power embodied in a well-told story. He admitted, in a manner both understated and poignant, that perhaps the courtroom needed to evolve, to recognize not only the rigidity of the statutes, but also the indispensable role of wit, art, and emotional resonance in holding true the promise of justice. That day, the fine was not the central focus, but rather the backdrop against which an extraordinary chapter of modern resistance was written. Veronica Stark emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant, having transformed a punitive measure into a rallying cry for free expression. In the following days, her performance at the courtroom circus became the subject of fervent discussions in cafes, universities, and social media posts. Critics and supporters alike dissected every nuance of her sermon, admiring how she had turned a stage of oppression into one of exaltation and hope. The legacy of the courtroom circus was clear. It had transcended the confines of one legal proceeding to become a symbol of modern dissent. It was a celebration of the absurd, a defiant response to the monotony of oppressive regulation, a vivid reminder that where there is passion and humor, there is invariably a path toward transformation. The events of that day would be etched into local lore, a shimmering moment where law and art coalesced into a single, radiant act of rebellion that resonated far beyond the walls of the courthouse. In sum, Chapter 2 was not merely a continuation of Veronica Stark's legal struggle. It was an invitation to reimagine the mechanisms of power, to see even the rigid institutions of justice as canvases upon which the color and unpredictability of human spirit could be expressed. The courthouse, now a symbol of both the absurdity and the promise of change, had given way to something much more profound, a space where laughter and defiance could coexist with the ancient rituals of law, forever altering the course of a society hungry for reinvention. In the days following the courtroom spectacle, Corsair found itself in the midst of an awakening, one that rippled far beyond the marbled halls of justice. What began as a single act of defiance had evolved into a broader dialogue about dissent, legacy, and the power of collective voice. The city's streets buzzed with an energy unburdened by the old hierarchies of power, as whispers of change grew into earnest proclamations of revolution. Veronica Stark, once seen solely as a defendant in a peculiar legal crusade, now emerged as the nucleus of a burgeoning movement. Across the city, from the ivy-clad campuses of ancient universities to the graffiti-adorned back alleys, citizens embraced her narrative as a call to arms for the spirit of free expression and innovation. Social media exploded with hashtags and digital art inspired by her fiery defense, each post a pixel in the vivid mural of modern resistance. Community gatherings sprouted in unexpected places, a lively debate hosted in a once quiet cafe corner, an impromptu poetry reading on a cobbled square, and even underground symposiums where intellectuals and creatives converged to challenge the outdated doctrines of authority. Each meeting was imbued with a shared sense of possibility, a vision that the structures which had long constrained them could yield to a new order shaped by empathy, curiosity, and bold imagination. Yet, as the movement gained momentum, so did the challenges. Traditional critics, alarmed by a shift that threatened the status quo, began to mobilize. They painted Veronica's transformation as dangerous radicalism, a harbinger of chaos set to dismantle centuries of rule. Opinion columns in venerable newspapers warned of an epidemic of dissent, questioning whether the newfound passion could subvert the careful balance between order and anarchy. Amid this tension, the city's ruling elite convened in secret, deliberating a strategy to reassert control over the vibrant but disruptive forces at play. Ironically, in their attempts to quash the rising tide, they only intensified the public's resolve. Every act of suppression was met with a larger outpouring of creative defiance. A mural dedicated to irony on the courthouse wall, a street performance that mimicked the judge's stern countenance in exaggerated satire, a viral video where citizens declared that justice was more than a relic of tradition. Veronica herself adapted to the swirling currents of change with a calm, steely determination. She organized assemblies where the conversation was not only about resisting oppressive decrees, but also about crafting new narratives. With each meeting, she emphasized that the movement was not a call to disorder, but an invitation to reimagine the fabric of society, a society where cultural expression and civic duty danced in tandem rather than clashing in discord. In one notable gathering held in an open park beneath ancient oak trees, Veronica stood before an impassioned crowd, her voice carrying the weight of both history and hope. "We are not here to tear down our institutions entirely," she declared, eyes bright with conviction, "but to reclaim them, to infuse every law, every regulation with the spirit of the people. We stand on the precipice of a new era, one where the measure of justice is not the rigidity of tradition, but the vibrancy of our shared dreams." Her words resonated deeply. From that day forward, the narrative shifted, from one of courtroom defiance to the creation of a new civic ethos. Citizens began to see that even institutions built on stone and precedent could be reimagined through the lens of artistic expression and communal dialogue. Local councils invited artists to collaborate on murals and installations within public spaces. Courtrooms experimented with community participation, and even the somber rituals of legal pronouncements began to incorporate moments of reflection and creativity. The impact was palpable. As the movement intertwined with daily life, instances of thoughtful protest and artistic dissent were met with cautious yet genuine reforms. The fine that once symbolized oppression had been reframed into a discussion point for broader legal and cultural evolution. In every corner of Corsair, voices began to echo a simple but profound truth. When people dare to speak and create, they not only disturb the silence, they redefine what it means to be free. Thus, Chapter 3 marked a turning point, an era when the courtroom was not the end of a story, but the spark that ignited a revolution of ideas. The old guard, although still entrenched in their traditions, found themselves navigating a landscape transformed by the relentless pulse of creativity and the unwavering demand for a more inclusive, dynamic society. And as the citizens of Corsair embraced this new dawn, they carried forward the enduring lesson that in the interplay of law and art, every challenge holds within it the seed of renewal. The collective heartbeat of Corsair pounded with a new rhythm, a cadence that no longer echoed the monotony of subjugation, but the vibrant pulse of creativity and hope. In the aftermath of courtroom theatrics and citywide rallies, the final chapter of this unfolding saga arrived not as an abrupt climax, but as a gentle, resolute transformation in the fabric of society. Veronica Stark, whose name had once been etched in bold strokes across headlines and graffiti walls alike, now stood as both a living symbol and a steady guide through the revolution of ideas. The relentless tide of dissent had matured into a movement rooted not in chaos, but in the courage to forge a future that harmonized law with artistic expression. Against a backdrop of reimagined public spaces, from courtrooms adorned with emerging murals to civic halls where impassioned debates wove through the air like intricate tapestries, the city recognized that change was a shared performance. In a grand assembly held in Corsair's central plaza, citizens gathered beneath illuminated banners that shimmered with messages of unity and transformation. Representatives from all walks of life, artists, jurists, educators, and activists, assembled to draft what would later be known as the Charter of Creative Justice. This document was not a legal construct in the traditional sense, but a covenant that affirmed the rights of every citizen to express, critique, and reimagine the institutions that governed them. As the proposal was read aloud, a harmonious blend of words steeped in legal tradition and poetic defiance, an overwhelming sense of possibility filled the air. For many, this moment crystallized their belief that structures, however ancient, could be reinvented. The power of dissent had transcended its initial act. It was now an integral dialogue, engaging not with protest alone, but by envisioning a society where law was not merely imposed, but co-created with the collective spirit. The very edifice of justice, once viewed solely through the lens of rigid authority, evolved that day. In its corridors, trials began to incorporate open forums and community participation, transforming archaic procedures into inclusive rituals of debate and reflection. Judges and lawyers, once the sole custodians of legal discourse, learned to embrace the unexpected insights that emerged from art and public sentiment. New policies blossomed from collaborations between creative minds and seasoned jurists, infusing legal frameworks with empathy and nuance. Veronica's own journey reached a serene yet potent denouement. Stepping away from the center stage, she allowed the movement to expand its repertoire beyond her singular voice. In quiet moments, she reflected on the weight of her role, not as a martyr or savior, but as one among many who dared to envision a different way of living together. Her defiant spark had kindled a flame that now warmed a multitude. Each citizen became both custodian and innovator of their collective destiny. In that luminous final hour, as dusk softened into night, the city of Corsair felt reborn. It was a place where vibrant murals and digital streams coalesced with solemn, legal recitations, a hybrid realm that celebrated both the stability of order and the transformative essence of free expression. The legacy of the courtroom, the ripple through the streets, and the charter in the plaza were imprints on a society now marked by its willingness to evolve. The final act was not an end, but an enduring beginning, a mosaic of voices blending into a symphony that would resonate into tomorrow. Corsair had shown that true justice lies not solely in the careful application of laws, but in the soulful interplay between tradition and the ever-pulsing heart of the people. With every spoken word, every painted mural, and every shared dream, the city affirmed that the power to create a fairer, more compassionate society dwells within each of us. And so, as the curtain gently fell over that transformative day, a quiet promise lingered in the air, that the dance between law and art, restraint and revolution, would forever be the makings of a living, breathing legacy, a final act that was, in reality, the perpetual overture to endless possibility.